lecturer, Dr. Nur Binti Nordin, and we are from Group 4. We're presenting the effects of pandemic COVID-19 economic inflation in Malaysia. And I am Nur HIKMAH FATIMAH ZAHARA Binti Ahmad SHUKRI, and my norm matrix is A20AA20, and I will explain for my part introduction. The surge of pandemic COVID-19 has a big effect for our country, Malaysia. Now Malaysia is still experiencing its outbreak, with until Malaysia economic business was under crisis from the several factors. The closure of business representing small, micro and medium. Economics was under pressure seen before the lockdown. However, it became more worse. The lockdown for the 2 weeks able prevent economic damage. Malaysia was expected gaining with 5.5% rate on 2020 while increased to 5.6% at the final quarters of 2021. Recently, Malaysia GDP growth was projected recovery to 6.2% on 2022, but seemingly likely the movement was unfulfilled due to the lack of government support and government raising prices for raw material. This reflects to evolution of GDP growth, as same as CPI, Consumer Price Index. However, domestic economic trends and rebuilding fiscal policies frequently would affect the market sales between consumers, more effectors to lose a huge amount of potential and harm. So, this assignment we can describe as following impact of the pandemic with the previous year.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is ZAKWAN and I will explain about my part, that is economic activity and impact of COVID-19 to the economic growth. Okay, for the economic activity, the economy in Malaysia is moving to progress because Malaysia has a various economic sector that contribute a lot of national income and economic performance. Okay, there is a several economy that is the largest contributor to our country, that is services sector, manufacturing, agriculture, mining and carrying. Okay, the services sector is the sector that contribute the most to the country economic growth, and this sector also contribute to GDP at 57.7% in 2019. That is before the COVID-19 happened. Okay. The second largest sector in contributing to the country economic performance is the manufacturing sector, which contribute 22.3% of Malaysia GDP. Apart from that, the services sector, that is tourism, is also a sector that has grown up before the onset of the pandemic, and its development is clear when in 2019 the sector has contributed RM86.14 billion to national income. Okay. Next we go to the impact of COVID-19 to the economic growth. Okay. The implementation of PKP has limited all sectors of the economy except 70 service. That is namely food and beverage, healthcare, medicine, water, energy, humanitarian aid and so on. This has led to the reduction in national income and GDP plugged by 70.1 in the second quarter of 2020. Okay. The sector that clearly show a severe negative impact is the tourism sector. At the beginning of the implementation of PKP, the tourism sector was the most affected and did not run for so long that many companies such as tourist bus service went bankrupt and had to close their business due to not being able to cover their business costs. Okay. In addition, this prolonged viral pandemic could lead to a weakening of the Malaysian ringgit and also have a negative impact on our country GDP. The logistics sector was also severely affected due to the lockdown. This can be explained through trade between countries involving port can be affected and becoming more complicated. In the manufacturing sector, there are many cases involving factory worker, and this had lead to the closure of the factory. Okay, the manufacturing sector is one of the largest sector that contribute to the economy income, to the economy country income and GDP, and this is evident by the contribution of export in excess of 1 trillion annually. Okay, factory in the country play an important role as a source of economic growth. as they are largely in the international supply chain, and closure for no reason will affect the production of giant companies whose suppliers operate in Malaysia. Okay. After that, we also have a good impact to the economic growth. That is, e-commerce platform being increased and becoming one of the sector that contribute to national income while pandemic. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you.
COVID-19 has a negative influence on Malaysia's economy as seen by the high unemployment rate. Official unemployment rose from 3.5% in 2019 to 4.6% in 2020 due to this pandemic. As a result of the pandemic, the unemployment rate is rising. This condition arose as a result of decreased industrial activities, slower import and export of commodities, rising production costs, and a decrease in aggregate demand, accompanied by a decrease in production. Furthermore, many Malaysians were forced to leave their jobs. This makes it harder for those who are unemployed to find work. The unemployed labor force can contribute to the national income, but due to the pandemic, they have been unable to find work. In addition, people's living standards are also deteriorating as a result of unemployment. People are not working, hence they have no money and no access to economics research. As a result, if the unemployment rate is high, living standard will fall. The coronavirus pandemic has resulted in large shocks to both demand and supply, which consequently could result in higher inflation. In Malaysia, demand pull inflation happened during this pandemic. Demand pull inflation is caused by an imbalance between total demand and total supply of goods and services in a country at a given time. If there is a high increase in total demand and compared to total supply, then inflation will exist. In addition, due to the pandemic, cost push inflation also happened. This inflation happened due to an increase in the cost of production. When industries are faced with rising cost of production costs, they will push price up, so purchasing power is decreased. Furthermore, the impact is an unequal distribution of income. When the general price climbs, the per capita income of the fixed income group increase. The real income of a group with a high per capita income, such as the government, the number of employees will be reduced. Money's purchasing power is decreasing for this group. Following that, there will be a rise in investment and production. Because of the impact of COVID-19, when inflation occurs, the entrepreneur will make a bigger profit. As a result, an undistributed profit will be reinvested in the economy for the greater good and service.
Next is impact of COVID-19 to the economic activities. It involves several sectors such as the manufacturing sector, tourism sector, and the oil and gas industry sector. For the manufacturing sector, the implementation of PKP has an impact in the manufacturing sector. Several sectors in manufacturing are allowed to continue operation throughout the PKP with the approval of MITI. Based on Graph 1, Malaysia's Purchasing Management Index (PMI) continued to shrink, and in March 2020, with the score was 48.4 compared to 48.5 in February 2020. Among the factors to the decline in PMI is due to lack of new demand, which is new order from importing countries, lack of supply, and slowdown in export or import activities. For the tourism sector, based on Graph 2, The data is from 2009 to 2020 for inbound tourism has recorded a significant decline in growth due to the spread of COVID-19 globally. This situation has also affected several related sectors. Among them is the aviation sector, some of which have announced expected losses or as well as had to be restructured the workforce due to the burden of high contingent costs. The accommodation sector was also affected by the sharp reduction in demand as well as booking by customers. The country's economy was affected by the pandemic, especially in the tourism, hotel, retail and investment sector. The country's economic recovery period is expected to be at least 6 months after the pandemic crisis ends. The tourism sector could lose 15 billion ringgit Malaysia to 16 billion ringgit Malaysia due to lack of tourists. Next is the oil and gas industry sector. Global oil demand was affected by COVID-19 and many countries decided to restrict air travel. The fall in oil price affect the government as it will further reduce government revenue. The oil decline trend will continue to remain and the situation depends on various other factors besides the effect of the COVID-19 contagion. On 7 to 13 March 2020, there was a decrease in oil price by type. For RON 97 dropped 21 cents to RM 2.19 per liter. For RON 95, it dropped by 19 cents to RM 1.89 per liter. For diesel, also decreased by 17 cents to RM 1.6 per liter.
Malaysian economy has grown rapidly since the country gained independence. This sustained economic growth was contributed by the change in the country's economic structure from traditional agricultural sector to the modern economic sector, namely industry, service, and mostly recently the knowledge-based economy. There are two policies that implementation in Malaysian economics. First is fiscal policy. The COVID-19 crisis has presented more challenge great in managing public finance in addition to increasing risk exposure fiscal. The government focused on implementing strategies at every level through the implementation of several economic stimulus packages and recovery plans. Okay, next is monetary policy. The COVID-19 crisis has forced the government to implement a fiscal stance to fund counter-cyclical measures to stimulate the economy and accelerate the recovery process. Total stimulus package and economic recovery plans of 20% of GDP has been injected into the economy.
For conclusion, the pandemic that prolonged almost for 2 years has affected a lot of economic sector in our country. One of the major issues that can be highlighted during these tough years that is the inflation rate in the country. Besides that, government and other private bodies should be more emphasized on determining what are economic activities that should be carried during post-pandemic time. Besides that, government should come up with new policies to overcome the unemployment rate and inflation rate. Finally, government and all private body sector has to work together to overcome this issue and has to make sure our country can strengthen its economic sector and increase our national GDP too.